Hey, this is Paranormal Girl. Interview with Abductee Betty Andreasson, Luca. Of the many cases and reports of alien abduction, the Betty Andreasson encounter of 1967 had stood the test of time and ridicule as one of the best documented accounts of mankind's encounter with beings not of our dimension. Countless websites and message boards actively discuss her case even today, and at least 5 books have been written, not only of her monumental abduction of 1967, but the ongoing alien contact involving Betty and other family members. The interviewer that I'm going to read to you recently had an opportunity to interview Betty's daughter, Becky. And the readers responded so positively to her information and insight. The interviewer was honoured to have the occasion to glean important information from Betty. In the city of South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, on the night of January 25th, 1967, one of the most celebrated cases of UFO abductions began. Betty Andreasson was working in her kitchen while her 7 children, mother and father, were in the living room. Shortly after 6:30, the lights in the house briefly blinked. Immediately thereafter, a reddish light began to beam through the kitchen window. The sudden darkness in the house set the kids' nerves on edge, and Betty ran to comfort them. Her father ran into the kitchen to peer out of the window and found the source of the unusual light. To his utter shock, he saw 5 odd-looking beings coming toward the house with a hopping motion. So it began, almost 40 years ago. And now, this is the interview with Betty. BJ. I want to start off by saying it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to ask a few questions of you, Betty. The answers will be very important to those of us who study the abduction phenomena. The most widely known event in your history is the 1967 abduction. Had abductions been happening before this time? Betty answers, yes. They were much earlier encounters. However, the only conscious recollection of a peculiar experience before undergoing regressive hypnosis was an incident in 1950. It was the day, heading up the hill near the barn, when I glanced toward the sky and saw what looked like the moon, but it was getting bigger and bigger and seemed to be coming toward me. Then, many years later, during the ongoing investigation of my UFO case, the memories of being taken aboard that moon-like craft emerged. I was transported to an area, entered the world of light to see the One. Before returning home, small, large-headed, dark-eyed beings transplanted something in my head, which was later thought to be a BB-like tracking device. This object was retrieved through my nose in 1967 by grey beings while aboard their craft. 2 other childhood experiences occurred in 1944 and 1949. These were brief, and I was not taken anywhere. BJ. During the celebrated abduction in Massachusetts in 1967, most researchers indicate that your father was the first person to actually see the alien beings. What was his initial reaction? Betty. We all saw and experienced the power go out, the pulsing reddish-orange lights flashing at the pantry window, and the silence. My mother and the children were rushed into the parlour, but my father, unknown to me at the time, had passed us to check what was happening outside. Yes, he was the first to view the grey beings in a hopping-like motion coming down the hill to the porch. He thought they were kids dressed in Halloween spaceman costumes and looked freaky to him. BJ. The beings are described as odd-looking. Can you describe them further for us? And did anyone beside your father see the hopping motion? Betty. The beings were small, were 3 to 5 feet tall, had very large pear-shaped heads with grey skin, large dark almond-shaped eyes, tiny holes for nose and ears, slits like mouths, and very little neck. They had a body, legs and boots, arms and hands with only 3 fingers. They wore a blue tight-fitting suit with a belt and body strap across their chest. An eagle insignia was on their upper arm. They gave off a feeling of peace. They communicated through mental telepathy and levitated in a smooth fashion as they moved. No, my father was the only one that saw them in a hopping type walk. However, he did not walk up the stairs when we entered the craft. We hopped past the stairs as we went inside. BJ. Becky has told me that she does not recall actually being in a suspended state, but does remember seeing the other family members in this state. Was this also true for you? Betty. No, I remember when the beings were in the parlour for the exchange of books. Yes, I saw my whole family in a state of suspended animation and was very concerned. I'm sure the beings read my mind, knew my apprehension, and decided to briefly take Becky out of the suspension to quell my fears and show me my family was all right. That was when Becky, unknown to me at the time, had already begun going through symbolic training at a much younger age, and was allowed to see the beings, and thin blue book exchange took place. BJ. The aliens are described as communicating with you through a type of telepathy. Did you just understand in your mind what they were saying? Betty. No. At first it was difficult to understand. Everything seemed so odd. I thought they meant to have wanted burnt meat and started to fry some. I started to fry them some. They jumped back as if alarmed from the rising smoke, recognized I didn't quite understand, and once again through telepathy revealed that they were seeking knowledge tried by fire. The only thing I could think of that had been tried by fire was the Bible. The writings of past ages have been tried, questioned, and survived, were filled with wisdom and knowledge, and sought after as food for body, soul, and spirit for hundreds of years. BJ. It is reported that the aliens wore a symbol like a bird on their sleeve. Was this a very distinctive emblem? Betty. Yes, the eagle insignia was gold in colour. The odd thing was its wings were small. It was later I realised that this group of beings must have had something to do with the huge eagle I was transported to see, and that experience during 1967 encounter. BJ. Were you able to ask questions, or were you only able to listen to them? Betty. No, I didn't ask any questions, because the whole experience was unusual. I was in a strange situation and wanted to make sure that they would take me back home. I did not question them about being physically measured, because they first told me that they were only going to measure me for light. I also questioned the multi-voices in the light that had called my name. BJ. It is quite obvious that you eventually were not frightened, but felt a sense of comfort. Did the aliens tell you something to calm your spirit, or did they reassure you with their thoughts? Betty. When they entered my home in Ashburnham, Mass, they gave me off a feeling of love, and even though they moved about very methodically and looked very odd, it felt what was happening was supposed to be. I believed them to be angels. They were in control, in my home as well as aboard their craft. My family were fine, so my mind must have accepted the situation, and I felt a sense of peace that we all were protected no matter what. For I believe what God's word stated. I will be with you, even until the end. And if God be with you, who can be against you? BJ, can you describe for us the UFO that you were taken to from your home? Did anyone else see the craft beside yourself? Betty, the craft was silver-coloured, saucer-on-saucer shape, had large, cut crystal-like orbs, which I was allowed to view when the leader, Quasgar, dematerialized the outer skin surface of the lower part of the ship. A smaller orb was at the top of a metallic stem. This same stem held the lower large orb as well. Two armatures, 2/3 of the way up, the stem held another crystal wheel that revolved around a clear tube filled with some grey liquid. There were 3 or 4 of these type machines in a circle under the craft. The craft had set down on a slight slope in the backyard, and 4 legs were adjusted somehow to level the craft. They were orange, red lights pulsing from the ship. I don't think anyone else saw the craft the way it was parked on the small hill. Even my father, who was the first to see the beings come into the porch, would not be able to view the vehicle, for he was looking out the front pantry window, not the back window. BJ, it has been written that you felt that you were taken from the craft outside of your house to a mothership. Can you give us any details of this experience and what it felt like? Betty, I assume you're speaking of the 1967 encounter. Once I was inside the saucer-shaped ship, it seemed huge. I was first taken to an upper room, then brought down in an elevator and made to change into a white garment. I was then examined, brought back to change my clothes again, and brought into the Quonset hut type room where were chairs on both sides of a track. I was submerged in a liquid while sitting in the chair. The liquid was drained, and I was escorted by 2 of the grey beings who put black hoods over their heads. We moved along a track through a tunnel into a red atmosphere where there were peculiar red creatures having eyes at the end of 2 stalks. I really don't know if I was transferred to a mothership from the saucer craft or not. I believed I was taken to a place, not another ship. BJ, when you were returned home, how much of your experience inside the UFO could you recall? Betty, I could not remember because the beings placed an amnesia block, so I would not recall the entire experience. Quasgar said he was locking secrets in my mind, and when the time was right, they would be released. At the same time, he must have closed the record in my subconscious concerning the encounter, and knew it was safely hidden from my memory. He said it would be a while before my race would believe me. Years later, while undergoing regressive hypnosis and being left in subliminal hypnosis, the entire account returned to my memory. BJ, what was the reaction of the rest of your family after they were freed from their suspended animation? Betty, I don't think they remembered at the time. Again, the beings had to have placed an amnesia block on them as well. If they did remember anything, it probably felt like a dream, and they never mentioned it, except for Becky's dream of little clay men. BJ, when the details of your abduction experience were made public, did this totally change your life and the lives of your family? Betty, yes. Many things changed in my family. My father passed on. My ex-husband disappeared. My 2 sons died in an auto accident. My mother came to live with us, and I moved to Florida with her and my 2 youngest daughters. I was told not to speak to any reporters. I had to sell my home. The children had to attend other schools. My whole life and my family had changed and went through some very difficult times. Then I was caught up in a whirlwind publicity tour to help publicise the Andreasson affair book. And there were many news, radio and television interviews and book signings and also lectures. I felt nervous and not very articulate, having to talk before huge crowds, and I knew I had to, because sincere people concerned over the UFO phenomenon wanted, and some needed to know what had happened and what was going on. BJ, after your case was investigated fully and became public knowledge, did you suffer any ridicule from your friends or acquaintances? Betty, no, I can honestly say people were absolutely wonderful. You know, when I was thrust into the public eye, I didn't have a question in my mind that people would not believe me with what happened, because it's the truth. If there were any that didn't believe, they must have said it without me hearing it or knowing it, and that in itself reveals the kindness of our human race. There were few unhappy professionals in the UFO circles of research that did not appreciate the publicity and interest of my UFO encounters received. BJ, did you meet Mr. Luca because of your shared abduction experiences? Betty, yes, and I think it was prearranged somehow. My now husband, Bob Luca, had a UFO experience as well as a child. And as an adult, when he lived in Connecticut, he also didn't tell others about it. Bob took time off from work, and he and his friend went across country to see some of the states, to find one that they might like to relocate themselves and their family to. On the way back to Connecticut, Bob's friend happened to mention his sister-in-law lived in Florida, and immediately they decided to go and see her. She worked as a cook at the restaurant called The Clock, where I had gotten a job as a waitress. We had talked for a while, and I told her a little about myself. Catherine spoke about me during dinner and the night they arrived, and mentioned I had some kind of UFO experience. Bob felt the need to speak with me about his own UFO encounter, came to the restaurant and asked me out to lunch. At first I thought he was a reporter looking for an interview. He convinced me he was not, that he had also had a UFO experience and needed to talk to someone like me, who would not ridicule him about his own abduction. Well, I agreed. He took me out for lunch, and as Bob says, and I've been buying a lunch ever since. BJ, thank you so much for the time you have spent with me. Do you have any additional comments you would like to relate to our readers? Betty, may God bless each and every one who searches for the truth in Jesus Christ. Betty Ann Luca. So my question to you all, is there anyone else that believes in this story? Because after reading this interview and her story, she has nothing to lie about. I think this lady is telling the truth, and I will leave a link in the description of this site that I found. And I suggest you go look for those books, especially on Amazon. I found one particular book. It will make for a very good read, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you for listening.